Hello, and welcome to History on Blast, episode 24, To Anacreon in Heaven. On today's episode, we're putting Francis Scott Key on blast for borrowing the music for the American national anthem from a British frat boy drinking song. But first, this month in history. On May 12th, 1937, King George VI of England was officially crowned King of England, though he had been acting in that role since the December prior, when his elder brother, Edward VIII, abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. King George VI then went on to lead his kingdom through the Second World War and the defeat of the Nazis.
Hello, listeners. I'm Kay, a musical theater nerd.
And I'm Warren. I'm musically challenged.
We host a podcast every Wednesday called Tone Deaf, a theater nerd's guide for their musically challenged spouse. Join us as I introduce Warren to musicals he's never seen and test his knowledge about musical theater.
You have to have knowledge before you can be tested.
Well, you've come a long way, Warren. Now you know that Andrew Lloyd Webber created Cats and not West Side Story.
Is that the show with the Cobras?
And we still have a ways to go.
Join us every Wednesday for Tone Deaf.
So, let's talk a little bit about Francis Scott Key and the Star-Spangled Banner. So, pretty much everybody knows the poem by Francis Scott Key that is now the American national anthem, The Star-Spangled Banner, which is about the bombardment of Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, and the fact that even though it was bombarded through the entire night, the flag was still there in the morning, and they didn't lose the fort to the English, and, they didn't surrender, the flag wasn't destroyed, and it was this really big moment in the country's early history. The poem was originally written on September 14th, 1814, and it didn't become the national anthem until March 3rd, 1931. But here's the thing. Back in the early 1800s, it was really normal to just kinda crib music from somewhere else. In the case of the Star-Spangled Banner, they cribbed it from a song called To Anacreon in Heaven, or the Anacreontic Song, which was a popular British drinking song written in the 1700s for a men's social club known as the Anacreontic Society, which was basically a bunch of British dudes getting together in a specific pub and singing and drinking. They would also play music. They had ballet at times, all kinds of things, but the short version is that the Anacreontic Song, or To Anacreon in Heaven, was kind of their club theme song, which basically means that the tune of the national anthem is stolen from a frat boy drinking song, which is weirdly appropriate in the grand scheme of things. So what is the Anacreon Society? Pulling it back, first we're going to explain who Anacreon is, because it turns out that this is not just a weird word, they actually named their club after a dude. Anacreon was a Greek lyric poet who was well known for his, you guessed it, drinking songs. For the most part, what he wrote was lyric poetry in the Ionic dialect. It was composed to be sung or recited with the accompaniment of music, which is what lyric poetry means. And in his case, it would usually be performed with the lyre, as that is, the instrument of ancient Greece. He was a pretty cool dude, all things considered. He was born in 582 BC, and he died in 485 BC, which means that he absolutely lived long enough to have a fairly major impact on poetry and drinking songs of ancient Greece, and also apparently on English drinking clubs, such as the Anacreontic Society. The Anacreontic Society was, for the most part, a musical group. They actually said themselves that they were dedicated to wit, harmony, and the god of wine, which would be Bacchus, for those of you who are following along at home. The group was founded in approximately, according to an anonymous history of the Anacreontic Society, 1766. And initially they just met in, whatever tavern was around. Eventually they moved specifically to the London Coffee House on Ludgate Hill, and then they moved to the Crown and Anchor Tavern in the Strand, and that was because their membership had gone from about 25 people all the way up eventually to 80 people. They had some pretty big names in there. Haydn actually performed at one point. And the group was dissolved in approximately 1792. It didn't really last all that long. But in 1777, they wrote, specifically, John Stafford Smith wrote the tune and Ralph Tomlinson wrote the words of the song To Anacreon in Heaven, which was their theme song, their drinking song, and sort of the way they would open their evening. They would have a concert and a meal, and then they would sing that song, and then move on to the more lighthearted and fun parts of the evening. And really, I don't have too much more to say on this topic. It's sort of just a little bit of a weird one, but I think that it's worth everybody knowing that the American national anthem is basically a drinking song. It was popular on both sides of the ocean, and everybody would have known exactly what it was when it started. The part that kind of blows my mind is, how often do we hear people go attempt to perform the national anthem and screw it up fairly badly, because it is an extremely difficult song to sing. It actually has a range of 19 semitones, and that's hard unless you're trained to it. That's why you really only hear the anthem sung by professional singers. So when you consider that it was originally a drinking song, you have to think about people singing that same tune, but now they're drunk. And that's going to just about do it for us this week. It's a shorter one than usual, and I am sorry for that. Things were a little bit chaotic here at home base. Hopefully, though, the next episode should be longer. I have some pretty solid plans for what that one is going to be about. As always, if you have any suggestions for episode topics, things you'd like to hear about, you can find me on Twitter at HistoryOnBlast, or you can send me an email at historyonblast@gmail.com. We've also now, along with the coffee that you can find a link to on Twitter, we've also got a Patreon, and as soon as we can get someone on there as a supporter, I'm going to start doing bonus episodes. I've got a plan for that, which is going to be sort of more in-depth looks at things we've already talked about, but not, the same events. It's going to be things like, we've talked about George Washington, so why not talk about him some more? Maybe not in the context of him being a hypothetical goat zombie, but perhaps instead talking about, how we have this very specific image of George Washington, the military commander, but he was actually fairly bad at it in a lot of cases. Fun things like that. As always, if you're enjoying the show, feel free to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. That is always the best way to get more people listening to the show. Invite your friends to join us. Join the Facebook group. I also want to thank Defy Them All for the use of their song Keeper of Histories for the intro and outro of our program. And as always, thank you for listening.